Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Pedagogy Non Grata episode or podcast. Sorry, I'm here to interview Dr. Robin Codding tonight. She's a professor at Northeastern University in developmental psychology. Am I saying that right?
School psychology. Yep.
School psychology. I apologize. And she is someone who's done a lot of research on math instruction and math anxiety. And she's also has some association with the science of math movement, which is seeking to, I think, bring more evidence-based practices and explicit instruction to math instruction, generally speaking. So I'm very happy to have her on the podcast, and I was thrilled when she agreed to come on and chat. And I will say this podcast is actually like semi-retired. So I really only have guests on if I really want to talk to them. I used to try and worry about getting on a guest like every week or every month. I don't do that anymore. When I think of someone I really would like to have on the podcast to hear their thoughts on a topic, then I invite them. Um, so I hope the audience knows that Dr. Codding here is really someone worth listening to and has some really valuable insights to offer. So before I dive a little deeper into the topic, is there anything you'd like to say about introducing yourself? Anything I've missed or missaid?
No, that sounds great. Happy to be here and have this conversation with you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you joining me. Um, okay, well let's dive right in. What is math anxiety?
Okay, great question. What is math anxiety? So, one of the things when we think about math anxiety is we have to recognize that math anxiety is related to the other forms of anxiety that exist out there, but it is also distinct. So, we have to talk about what math anxiety is and what it isn't. So, math anxiety refers to feelings of tension, worry, apprehension that interfere with performance on math related tasks. Math anxiety can make it difficult to solve math problems in the classroom, but also in the real world. And math anxiety can lead to physiological responses like sweaty palms, rapid heartbeat, but also self deprecating or intrusive thoughts, and may result in attempts to escape or avoid math activities, which is where the problems really come in.
Hmm. So something that just immediately jumps out to me is, there's obviously a difference between anxiety as like a disorder and anxiety as a feeling. Um, I'm sure that everybody has felt some level of math anxiety at some point in their life. Um, I know I'm a grade A teacher, and I had to teach a really difficult algebra problem today. And it caught me off guard when I realized how challenging of a problem it was. And I had a moment of anxiety. I was like, oh my God, I got to remember how to solve this. Um, so I just feel like at what point does that anxiety become like an instructional problem in the classroom?
Yeah, I think this is a great point, one that's been asked of me before. Obviously, feeling stressed about math, disliking math, avoiding math, worrying about math is not necessarily math anxiety. Math anxiety has to interfere with math achievement. It's about how much does math anxiety about these math activities and tasks cause impairment. That said, I do think we should be concerned in our classrooms and our schools about how children feel about math. So there's a fair bit of data, survey data mostly, so it's perception. But these perceptions surveys are international. They found that as many as 59% of adolescents around the world worry about math class and they think it's going to be difficult. 31% report feeling nervous about doing math problems. And then, just like you said, when it comes to anxiety related to math in the school based setting, another survey indicated that as many as 1 in 4 teachers feel anxious engaging in math and as many as 67% of teachers say that math anxiety is a significant classroom challenge. So they're observing it in the context of their classroom from their students.
Hmm, that's interesting. I do feel like math in general has a sort of mythos about it in comparison to other subjects, where like a certain percentage of the population is just like convinced that math is more challenging than all the other subjects, and there's almost therefore this belief that it's okay if achievement is lower in math because math is scary or math is hard. Um, and I do wonder if that belief is harmful to educational outcomes.
For sure. I think this whole idea of math anxiety and why it's, this hot conversation at the moment, it's always been in existence. I think that's also important to understand is that we have been studying math anxiety for a really long time. It's just right now it's bubbled up and is this thing that we continuously talk about. And I think you're totally right. There's this underlying level of discomfort in our society with math. We often hear people say they're not math people or they can't do math, and that's perfectly acceptable. Everybody is fine if you say that, and that doesn't exist in other places. We also don't sort of do math for fun, and that's one of the things that came out of the COVID era, right? Was that one of these reasons why we saw these dramatic drops in math performance was because there was no other place that people were doing math besides school, or
Mm,
they weren't thinking about math in the same way as they were thinking about writing or reading, which we sort of integrate into our everyday lives.
mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think, you know, the obvious question though um, is it like the chicken or the egg, right? Like, I think this is the question that comes back to for everyone. I think there's a lot of people in that sort of constructivist camp, for lack of a better word, discovery-based learning, inquiry-based learning camp, who believe that, math anxiety is the cause of poor achievement in math, and therefore, if we can just make math instruction in class more fun, we can therefore increase achievement. And I think a lot of people on the other side of the coin are saying, well, um, achievement or under having a better or stronger understanding of math is probably going to make it feel more comfortable and less anxious. I just like anecdotally, I can say as a person, I was actually terrible at math in school. And I think it was because my parents were like, it's math. It doesn't count. We're not good at math. We're not a math people. We're a
Mhm.
reading people. We're a reading family. And I didn't try that hard math class. And now like math's my favorite subject to teach, and I feel like decent at it. I'm not going to say I'm a math genius, but I feel like pretty strong in math now, and I don't feel anxious about it, minus today's algebra problem. But I'm curious, like, what does the science say? Because you have actually done deep scientific peer-reviewed research on this topic, and I think you're probably one of the leading experts on this. So what does the
Yeah.
science show?
Yeah. So the science, so I mean, I fundamentally our messaging about math is concerning, right? Math is super predictable, it's hierarchical. That's probably why you like it now. It can be unpacked, it builds upon itself. The basics are super important. Once you have the basics, then you can put them together to do more complex activities. We haven't done a good job talking about math in an appropriate way or an effective way. And for sure, we actually know a lot about whether it's the chicken or the egg because that is where a lot of the research is. Um, Math anxiety has a small to moderate negative relationship with math achievement. That's been shown in 5 different meta analyses published between 1990 and 2021, which I think is pretty extensive on this topic. So these are all correlational studies that are looking at which thing comes first. How do we predict math anxiety? And what's interesting about it is that this relationship is bidirectional or reciprocal, meaning that poor math performance and experiences can lead to math anxiety and vice versa. Math anxiety may lead to poor math experiences and performance. But the most recent evidence tells us that this reciprocal relationship is actually not uniform. It suggests that poor early math performance actually affects later math anxiety more so than the reverse. So I
Hmm.
think, yeah, so I think that's particularly interesting. And we've done, we can dive into my stuff later, but we've done research that really kind of illustrates that and continues to demonstrate that that's the case.
Okay, well, I'm very inclined to believe you. So I am biased on this, but I'd love for you to give us your case. So, like, what's your best evidence that the poor math knowledge is the bigger precursor to math anxiety than the other way around?
Sure. Well, first of all, one of the things that we learned from all these series of meta-analyses is that there is a stronger relationship at the secondary level compared to the elementary level. There's also a stronger relationship when working on complex math tasks, and I think that's really interesting because of the whole notion that timed math tasks cause math anxiety, whereas these meta-analyses have demonstrated that it's really these complex tasks. So all of that is sort of in the backdrop. And what we have been able to do is actually look at this from an intervention standpoint. So we did our own meta-analysis of math anxiety interventions. We did that after learning. So I'm a university trainer and researcher. Many of my students were unable to actually do the activities and tasks that are required to for their certification and accreditation because of this idea of math anxiety. And so we started to take a deep dive into the literature and wanted to see, well, what are these interventions that are being utilized? So we looked at primary and secondary students, research with primary and secondary students only. Found two main categories of interventions: math skill building and therapeutic interventions. Those therapeutic interventions range from relaxation and breathing and positive self-talk to cognitive restructuring. And we found that math skill building interventions improved math outcomes and also reduced math anxiety. That effect was small, but meaningful, and that therapeutic interventions just reduced the symptoms of math anxiety but had no impact on math outcomes. But what I think is particularly poignant about this is that another study recently was published in 2025. It's a bigger meta-analysis, so they could do more moderators. They included undergraduate students, and they found the same thing. And they suggested, like us, that starting by addressing poor math skills is the most efficient and effective approach in schools. They highlighted, and we highlight as well, that if students experience high levels of math anxiety, then you're going to add that therapeutic approach. And what's interesting about their studies, they were able to show that positive self-talk or expressive writing, so things that address the cognitive restructuring piece of math anxiety, might be more useful than relaxation and breathing, which really just address the physiological symptoms. So I love that they had this 2025 study. That's Liu and colleagues. We also just finished a randomized controlled trial. And we did that because in the primary and secondary, when you look at just K to 12, there really was not very many comparison studies. So there would not be a study that looked at the instruction as usual, the maths tutoring, the therapeutic intervention, and then a combination of them. So all four of those conditions were not usually in these intervention studies. And our primary findings, we just finished this, suggest that for math outcomes, students with high math anxiety and low math skills did better with math tutoring, whereas math anxiety symptoms were reduced with the combined intervention. So I think we're seeing some emerging patterns as we start to look at the interventions, really illustrating the importance of addressing math skills first.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I was looking at this up as I was listening to you talk because there was I think a third meta that kind of found the same thing, wasn't there? Wasn't it the
Yeah,
2022 one by, I
2015.
can't even
Yep.
pronounce it, Samilati
Yes,
Fennell Johnson?
you got it. Yep.
Sorry. But I think one of the interesting things in that one is not only was the math support more effective at performance increases, it was also more effective at increasing or decreasing anxiety than motivational supports.
Yeah, right. Right. So they had another layer in there of the how they coded those particular intervention studies. Yeah. Yep.
And I have to say, and maybe this is my bias, but like I do find I'm deeply skeptical of like, say, like a mindfulness program during a math class that like that's going to make, or meditation or relaxation or breathing activities. And maybe whatever floats your boat, like to each your own. I can't imagine that helping me like reduce any anxiety. I would just find it like a waste of instructional time if like I was the student, you
Yeah.
know? But
We
so
actually
let's,
asked students. We actually
yeah.
asked students about that. Yeah, in our study, so we do this acceptability or social validity, and we want the students to give us their input on that. And what they told us is that they liked the math activities and they liked the relaxation and breathing activities, and we also did an expressive writing activity. But they only found the math helpful, so they did not find the other exercises helpful.
And
Fun to
that's
not.
that's really funny and it like it's bias confirming, but also at the same time, I feel like in that setting, people are almost positively like biased themselves. Like nobody wants to tell the researcher like, "Oh yeah, I found that useless." They want to like
Right.
put a polite face on it and be like, "It was good, it was good," you know.
Yep.
Um, and then I think you also got to consider the fact that like research in general seems to have a positivity bias. It's rare that people publish studies that say their ideas don't work. Um, so what about this time test thing? I think it's kind of you alluded to this a little bit too, but it seems to be the area where there's like the big fight. And I almost wonder if we kind of have to break time test down into two things, both as an instructional tool and assessment tool. But I'm kind of shocked about how much of a fight there is over this topic. Because I don't know if it's that big of even of a practice that it needs to be such a hot topic, but I'm curious to what you think. Why is time testing in particular the battle lines?
The big thing, yeah. I mean, this is why I'm actually in this space. I have not spent my entire career on math anxiety. I had to enter this research space because the work that I do is always applied. And so I'm always trying to solve the problem that's happening that we're seeing in schools. I'm interested in using data to inform instruction. And when none of those things were able to be done in the systems that I was working in, I had to figure out why. Literally, why I'm doing this work is because of this conversation that timed math tasks cause math anxiety, which was went viral because of an opinion piece. And when my students, my doc students, were the first ones to look into all of the citations and look into the research and found that there really was not anything that we could grab onto in the K-12 space. So then we started to dig into that. We found one study that truly, two studies, but the one study was the one that truly actually looked and isolated that timed component. So we then started doing more work in this area. So I agree with you. This is the battle lines. And I think it's actually because it renders itself in terms of what we think we should be doing in the math classroom to promote student learning. And I think that's why it's such a difficult thing. I remember having this conversation with a math educator, and she's like, "Oh, well, you and I both believe that fluency is important, Robin, but you and I don't agree on how to get there." And for me, that was actually a big thing for this conversation because I did not believe that this math educator valued fluency building, but they did.
Mm.
And so that was really interesting for me because to me, a lot of this goes back to how do we build fluency? So there's really hardly any studies that have actually done the work and empirically looked at timed versus untimed tests. We did that. And like I said, this precursor study by Grays and colleagues did that as well. When Grays and colleagues did it, they actually found that timed tactics improve or facilitated math performance, especially when fluency was the outcome, even for students with high math anxiety. It's just that students with high math anxiety overall had lower math performance. So then we started to really look into that quite a bit in different ways. Going back to one of the things, again, that came out of these initial meta-analyses, which I think is so interesting to be able to go back to these 5 meta-analyses on this relationship and then be able to really dig into some of the things that they were finding from a correlational standpoint and demonstrate it in a more empirical fashion. But one of the things I think I maybe already mentioned is that the challenging task, right, is the thing that actually seems to be related or have a stronger relationship between achievement and math anxiety. And so that's what we started to look into. So the first thing we did was show that if we mismatch the instructional tactic to the student's needs. So if the student needed to build acquisition, we gave them fluency building. If they needed fluency building, we gave them acquisition. Then the intervention was perceived as students to be less acceptable. Some students reported higher math anxiety, and we had poorer math outcomes. So that was sort of an initial, like, let's look at how matching the instructional tactic matters. And then in the more recent studies that Katie Mackey and Zazlowski and I have done, we actually looked at the timing. We compared timing, we controlled for timing, which hasn't been done previously. We had a overt timing and a covert timing condition, and timing did not impact math performance or math anxiety, but task difficulty did. So students reported higher math anxiety when working on complex math problems. And so again, that should sound familiar because that's that theme that we saw earlier. We also found that students with already moderate to high math anxiety reported higher math anxiety when completing those complex problems when timing was covert, which was again our untimed. Nothing was untimed, right? Because we controlled for timing, but they didn't know they were being timed. And that
Hmm.
actually produced the higher math anxiety.
Really? Why do you think that was?
Because I think, this is just what I think. My opinion is when you are doing something that is hard, that you don't have the prerequisite skills to do, and you don't know how long you're going to do it, you just sit there and say, wow, this is hard. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this. And so those cognitive interfering thoughts are perpetuated in that time. When they're given the overt timing, they're like, okay, I have this amount of time to do this task. And then it's over. I think it's an orienting component.
That's so fascinating. You know, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. One of the things I want to go to is this topic of more complex tasks versus less complex. And I actually think that this is my biggest beef with like the constructivist movement in math instruction, is their answer seems to be more complex tasks. Now, I used to work in a very constructivist school board, and we were really encouraged to like make the entire math class around like one or two problems for a class. Like pick a math problem so challenging that like it would take a group of students 40 minutes to solve was kind of the idea. And it's problem-based learning. Um, and I found like observing that one, students didn't get a lot of time to build fluency because they're only looking at one problem per class. Um, and two, because it's small, typically small group, what ends up typically happening is three out of the four kids check out.
Mhm.
One kid solves it and has fun with it and loves it and thinks this is an amazing lesson. And then the majority of the class just kind of felt like their time was wasted because they felt like the ceiling was too high for them, or the floor was too low or too high, sorry, to get real engagement. And I can see how that would cause anxiety. Like I see that in myself. If you just gave me a math problem I thought was so hard and I didn't have all the prerequisite knowledge to solve or the proficiency to solve, that would be very uncomfortable of a situation, especially if my peers were watching me try and solve it and I felt like I was being
Right.
like evaluated on that. Oh my God.
Yep. I mean, I agree. I actually had that experience in stats. There is a stats anxiety, which is a whole separate thing, in grad school when we were asked to code. And I was like, I don't even know what coding is. And so we just had to sit there the whole class and figure ourselves out how to code. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of face validity and logic to these findings as well. So I don't know why we are diving down into those challenge problems first. I think one of the things that consistently the folks that I work with and the folks that I talk to with the science of math, challenge problems are great at the end of the instructional sequence, like after the students have already mastered those prerequisite skills and now they're putting things together in a novel way. That's when you really get that creative problem solving, that flexibility, because the students already know how to do everything. They're already proficient. Now they're trying to use that content in a new and different way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like this is such a simple concept and it seems weird that like we're like proposing it like it's a novel thing, and yet there's people out there who've been like, what if we taught all the math in the most complicated way possible and then advertised it and marketed it as a way to reduce anxiety for students? Um,
Right.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I feel I hate to admit, I almost feel like I'm being a little dismissive of what they're doing. And I'm sure they'd say, well, you're straw manning my entire argument. But that is what I have seen playing out. So um and I truthfully I don't know another good way to teach math where you're not building slowly and linearly or hierarchically. Oh, I can't even say that word. I'm just embarrassing myself around the podcast. In a hierarchical way, because and that's what I like about math is I actually think math is way easier to teach than reading. And it's funny because like I'm a person who people know as someone who talks about a lot of how to teach reading. I think teaching math is way easier because it's so linear. You teach one concept in a procedure at a time, and then you teach them the next. And then if you do that in a slow and consistent, explicit way, you can just see how their knowledge explodes. You can't
Right.
do that with reading.
Yeah, and to me, the related, the biggest thing that is sort of mind blowing to me is that there is so much interdisciplinary research, for example, showing that fluency with calculation skills, both math facts and procedural math problems, is predictive of later math success. And that's it, early in school predicting high school outcomes, specific findings for pre-algebraic and word problem solving tasks, the development of fraction skills, both understanding concepts and procedures. So it's so remarkable to me that we're still having this conversation about teaching math facts to automaticity. And that's again where that math anxiety and instructional tactics come up. So
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that fluency piece because I feel like that's sort of the center of this argument too. Is it does seem like the constructivist approach is sort of just anti-math fluency. And even in how they want to assess it, like there's this becoming this pushback against time tests for assessing fluency. And, shout out to Dr. Amanda Vanderheyden. She's pointed that out to me many times that like it's not a valid test for fluency if you don't have timing on it. I tend to agree. I don't understand how you could test fluency without timing it. That doesn't make any sense.
yeah. I mean, yes, the earlier study that I was talking about where we were looking at like that instructional tactic match was one with Amanda, and I think I forgot to mention that earlier. For sure, right. With accuracy, one of the interesting things about school-based instruction in math is that there's this overemphasis on accuracy and underemphasis on rate of performance. But accuracy only tells us so much about how students have learned, and Amanda certainly has done so much research to demonstrate that. It's the rate of learning that actually shows us whether someone has mastered a skill or not in math. So I do think I always say that it's really the application that maybe we've gotten wrong, and then that has led people to have this misunderstanding about how to use fluency building activities or timed tasks. But really, the IES practice guide, so that's from the U.S. Department of Ed in 2021, that Lynn Fuchs, I think, led that panel. That really was very clear and illustrated the science. Before engaging in timed practice activities or fluency building activities, students should be highly accurate. They have to be over 90% accurate, and they have to understand the math reasoning that underlies those tasks. And then you engage in the timed task because the timed task is designed to promote efficient and automatic student performance so that students can perform skills with high levels of accuracy at a high rate. And that is actually what leads to generalization, robust understanding of math, as we already talked about, flexible problem solving, and promotes mastery. And again, I feel like there is just a lot of research to demonstrate that.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm I apologize to try and translate what you said to the reading people, but I think most of my audience is reading instruction people. And I just see a parallel, if you're teaching a kid to decode using phonics, you hit this early wall where they can decode words, but like they're sounding out all the words on the page. So that you give them a page three and they're like the at and it's painful to listen to, truthfully. But like um one of the things that we do in those situations is we use fluency drills to get them to the point where they're decoding and reading with automaticity to get past the point of just sounding out. Because they're entirely accurate. Like they can read every word on the page, but just can't do so fluently. It's those fluency drills that you use in those moments that I think can help build that automaticity and then makes comprehension easier. And I would imagine the same thing applies to math. Once you reach that point where it's automatic and you have a level of automaticity, then applying that knowledge to difficult, challenging problems and concepts is easier and will enhance their ability to solve application problems.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things we do a screening activity as part of one of our practicum class requirements. And right now, schools are doing both calculation and concepts and applications. And it is fascinating because everybody's interested in concepts and applications. Predictably, students are not able to engage in those tasks because the computation skills are far below what the expectations should be. And again, we know that that is a foundational skill, a necessary component required to engage in higher level math. But again, we have so much research on that. It's interdisciplinary. So it's just remarkable to keep seeing the pattern over and over. But still, like you said, have the same conversation about changing up how we're instructing.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we're in this circular conversation where, people want to jump ahead to the concepts and the application and skip the computation and procedural fluency?
Oh boy. I feel like that's the $1 million question, right? If we knew that, then we could just change this up. I mean, I don't think our curricula help at all. Like I talk about the next generation curricula, so the new curricula that are out there. Historically, we haven't even given math its due time in the instructional sequence in schools. So we for a long time we've had these 90-minute reading blocks. And then sometimes there was math. At one point in my career, like teaching math in kindergarten, people are like, "Oh, do we have time for that every day?" Um,
Oh
so
God.
I, right. So I feel like there's so many pieces, right? Like we have to build in time for math instruction. We don't have curriculum. There's been a lot of studies again of whether evidence-based components are built into curricula and uniformly, especially at the elementary level, because those are the prevention kinds of activities. Uniformly, it's no, or they're limited. So you have to supplement your curricula. And then there's no intervention time. So that's the thing, the biggest thing that I hear all the
Mm,
time is there is nobody to do intervention, and or we don't ever build in space for intervention, and or intervention for math can happen once a week because that's what we've built into the setting. So I feel like there's so many challenges that are related to math, and I don't know. I don't have the answer about why we focus so much. Um, I guess I one of the things that I postulated in kind of thinking about what we would talk about today um, was just this whole push for STEM
mm.
and how, nationally and internationally important that is, that we have these STEM job growth that is going to outpace other jobs, and evidence that STEM careers can pay substantially higher than other careers. And what kind does that mean, that we skipped over the basics and the foundations, and we have forgotten that STEM knowledge is built on foundational numeracy skills, and maybe that's part of the problem. So to me, it's even just those foundational numeracy skills, and thinking about it from that angle instead of piecing out the concepts from the procedures or the facts.
All right. I'm gonna give my little pet theory here. I think it's that the adults have math anxiety and they're trying to remove the math from the math instruction because they're nervous about teaching it. And I think there's something um, strangely attractive to people of like selling an overly idealized idea of what math instruction can be, sort of that, lack of a better word, that like Miss Frizzle approach,
Yeah.
where their kid is going to walk into their classroom, it's going to be rainbow colors everywhere. I know that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that like um, sometimes math instruction does need to be numbered problems on a page, and kids need like sufficient practice time. It just I don't know that we can make every single moment of a day fun, and I don't know that that's necessarily the best thing for learning outcomes either. I'm sure that there's a balance. I remember I had this grade two teacher who you would finish a math worksheet and she would hand it back to you like 3 minutes later with asking you to correct your mistakes, and there was no way to slip by her. And I would like just rush through and try and slide it into the bottom of the pile, and she would like pull it like right out and be on my desk so fast to have me correct my mistakes. But I'm sure I'm a better math student today because of that teacher. So shout out to Miss Muir from grade two. Um,
Yeah, that level of immediate feedback is amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. I think you're not wrong about that. Certainly there's this idea, this like notion, like you said, that people are glomming onto instead of doing the things that we know work, which that part I still don't get, but I guess it's exciting. I mean, because when you actually do some of these, when you use these evidence-based practices and you watch the kids do them, they love them. They think they're great. Like, drill and thrill. Like, give it to me more. I'm feeling successful, and that's what's breeding my motivation.
No, that resonates with me so hard. I've had so many students tell me they actually really enjoyed like the explicit math instruction and like very direct linear approach because they're like, oh, math suddenly makes sense for me. Like across my teaching career, I've heard kids say that. Um, I do find, and I one thing I hear too is that like teachers will often say like, "There's too much in the math curriculum. I can't cover it all."
Yeah.
Um, I tend to find the opposite. I tend to find like with a very like explicit approach, you tend to find like actually we can cover all this curriculum and have time left over at the end to do some of that like open-ended problem work towards like May, June. But anyways, it's been a super pleasure to have you on the podcast and hear you talk about math anxiety and instruction. And I hope I haven't talked too much. I want the guests to have heard what you had to say. Um, where can guests find more about you if they'd like to get in contact with you or read your work?
Sure. Yep. You can certainly find my page at Northeastern University. I am on Twitter and Blue Sky. So you can find me there as well.
Is there any final thoughts you want to share with the audience?
Ah, um,
Put you on the
yeah.
spot here.
I know you did. Well, yeah, I mean, I really appreciate what you have done with this podcast. I know you said you're semi-retired, but it seems to me that your whole mission is this translation between science and practice. And I really value that, and I think that we need to continue to have these conversations because there is this chasm, and I'm not totally sure why that is. And I guess I would say there's also this idea that a lot of the studies on math did not happen in the real world context, and that's just not true. And so I think it would, I think we need to keep having these conversations. So thank you.
Totally. I will say on just that note, like I hear people saying like, well, was that study done in a lab? And
Right.
I don't know about you, most studies I read on like instruction actually happen in classrooms.
Yep.
There's very few lab studies. And even if
Yep.
they were, I don't know if the study magically becomes like useless if it was done in a lab. But people
Yep.
seem there is this perception that like all education research is done like in secret government lab buildings with like three kids at a time and like the kids are bribed with cookies or something. I don't know. I don't know that that's even close to being accurate, but
That's right.
thank you so much for your time.